Morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to week 3 of the No Worries series. Just a couple of announcements before we thought. Plenty of chasing. First of all, this coming, as I said last week, but I just want to mention it again. This coming Wednesday night, we're doing our series every 2 weeks called Rabbi Meets the Expert. So we're doing an hour. I'm going to be talking a little bit from a Jewish perspective. Mrs. Krebs is an expert in the field. We'll be talking about the topic of dementia. It's a painful topic, but a necessary topic to raise awareness. So if you know anyone or yourselves, this is this Wednesday night right here. Also, not this Friday night, but next Friday night, we have the Mindful Minyan is back. That's at 6:15. That's tomorrow night a week, on the 28th of February. For men and women, it's a meaningful Shabbat experience. Yeah, we're good? And also, just wanted to mention that tonight, 2 weeks from tonight, I'm starting a 3-week Kabbalah series, Kabbalah meditation, for men and women. So people always tell me on a Thursday morning, I wish the men would hear this, so here's the opportunity to schlep them with. And here's similar things, but we're going to be doing 3 parts as the details are. Just watch all the updates on the WhatsApps and on the emails and so on. Okay, so I just want to begin with a little bit of a review from last week. We were working through the concepts of faulty thinking and dealing with worries and stress and so on. But we've been talking about the concept of dealing with our thinking in general and the concept of thought being controlled and the idea of how to recognize faulty thinking and so on. So just a bit of a review from last week first. So last week we talked about the pasuk, the verse of man is a tree. And we explained at length the concept that tree represents the midot, the emotions that are passionate, that are rooted, that are strong. And they are the essential personality of the human being. But the problem with midot, the problem with emotions is that they're very, very hard to change. So when we talk about negative thinking, the problem isn't the negative thinking, the problem is the feelings, the emotions that negative thinking brings. And therefore, changing our thoughts, changing our thoughts and changing actions, we'll soon see, change our emotions. So really, what we're talking about in this series, we're talking about developing and changing and controlling our thinking. It's not really the thinking that's the issue, it's controlling the thinking so that it should affect our feeling, essentially. Right? Which is all connected with the concept of Moach Shalit al Halev. No, this is the wrong thing. Moach Shalit al Halev, that's right. That the brain controls the heart, which was connected to the discussion we had last week on the therapy called CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is all about challenging the way we think in order to channel the way we feel. And that principle of Moach Shalit al Halev, that the mind controls the heart, as we explained last week, is really the foundation of so many modern theories of therapy and so on. Now, last week also began to talk about a very important concept, which we're going to expand on today, and that is the difference between thoughts and beliefs, right? So thought is just, we have thousands of thoughts each day, and thoughts are just a tool to express what we're thinking, and what we believe in, and what we cognitively process, right? So what happens is that we have a belief. The belief is what inspires a particular pattern of thinking, and then that pattern of thinking brings about the feeling, brings about the emotion. Which is really why we explained that we have to challenge, not so much our thoughts, it's more, we talk about challenging our thoughts, but really what it is challenging our beliefs, which are behind our thoughts, right? Now, I just want to pause here for a second, because there was one part that I wanted to mention last week, which I didn't get a chance to do, where we talk about beliefs in our thinking, our head, controlling and changing the way we feel. There is another thing that impacts the way we feel also. It's not the topic so much of the series, but important to mention nonetheless. Something that Sarah Edelman talks about as well, but very much rooted in Jewish thinking, and that's the concept of action, behavior, right? That behavior, what we do, so what we think and what we believe in affects the way we feel. But from the other end, how we act also affects the way we feel, right? Now, that's something that she talks about. It's something that's very well recognized today in modern psychology, but actually has its roots very, very strongly in Jewish literature. And it's the concept which we call in Hebrew, I've mentioned this many times, called Achrei HaMa'asim Nimshach HaLevavot. That after the actions, the heart follows. In other words, if we're in a particular setting, a particular mindset of negative emotion, and then we start to do something which is different, we start to do something which is more positive, that will also change the way we feel. So what's interesting is, our feelings, our emotions, are extremely difficult to change. And yet, they're the most important thing to change. The way we change them is working from both ends. We work with our thinking, which is above our emotion, because the thinking will channel and guide and inspire and change, hopefully, and improve the way we feel. But we also work from the other end, which is the concept of how we behave, how we act. And the way we act has a very profound impact on the way we feel. Now, I think I've shared this with you a long time ago, but I'm going to share with you again because it's so relevant to this idea. And also it happens to be, by Hashgacha Pratit, by divine providence, it happens to be next week's Parsha of the week, where the Torah gives us the commandment to build a Mishkan, to build a tabernacle. So when the Jews were in the desert, God commanded the Jewish people to build a Mishkan, a place of dwelling place for God. And then we know, and this was later done in the Beit HaMikdash, on Temple Mount and so on, we know that the most sacred vessel, the most sacred item in the Mishkan was the Aron, the Holy Ark. But in next week's Parsha, when God tells Moses and describes to him how the Ark should be built, he says the following. A very strange design. The Ark was built like a box. You see the box in the bottom there, right? But the truth is that there wasn't one box, there were 3 boxes. And the way the Torah describes it is as follows. That they had to build 3 boxes. The outer one was gold. The middle one was wood. And then the inner one was gold again. 3 boxes. And the commentaries, of course, ask, what's the point of this design? We understand the point of an ark, of a box, because it was called an ark, but it was really like a box-like structure, which was used to keep the Aron, it was to keep the Luchot, it was used to keep the 10 Commandments. So there was a Torah scroll there, the Talmud tells us, the 10 Commandments were there, the broken pieces of the first 10 Commandments were there, all holy items, and that was the holiest spot and the holiest item in the temple. But what's the point of these 3 boxes that no one could see? Because what actually happened was, you only see the outer box, then there was a cover on the whole thing. On top of the cover there were the kruvim, those angel-like figures, and that was it. The inner boxes no one saw. But, right? And yet there must be some depth, there must be some symbolism behind this structure where you have a gold box and a wooden box and then a gold box. And the commentaries explain a most fascinating idea which goes right into the heart of what we're talking about. And that is that the 3 boxes represent the 3 layers of human function. The 3 boxes represent the way we operate. The one box and the inside, the inner box, represents our thoughts, our cognition, the way we process information. The middle box represents our emotions, the way we feel, which again, as we said last week, that's who we really are. That's our personality. And the outer box represents action, which is why the boxes on the either side are metal, gold, whereas the inner box is wood. Wood comes from a tree. Wood doesn't have a consistency to it. In other words, trees are fresh, trees die. A wood can be strong, a wood can be soft. Woods can rot, or they can be preserved for a long time. They're up and down, they're not the same ever, right? Metal, on the other hand, is strong. Metal can be consistent, and it represents a certain sort of consistency and strength. So the way the way the human makeup works is the same way. Intellect is something we can control. Values are something we can create and process. Beliefs are something that if they're good beliefs, we can hang on to them. We can always believe them. It doesn't mean we're always consistent with them. It doesn't mean we always act on them. It doesn't mean we always feel the same way. But that's the way it is. We can commit in the head. In other words, we can be committed to certain principles, to certain truths, to certain values in the way. Now, true that seichel, cognition, can also change, and we can look at things from a different perspective, which is part of the greatness of if we choose to. But we're in control of that process. We're in control of the process of cognition, of thinking, and we give it its strength, and we give it its permanence, and we give it its consistency. On the other hand, the action is the same way, right? We're in control of what we do at the end of the day. A person has a choice. They could decide to do something. They can have a daily ritual or many daily rituals. They can act in a certain way. They can. I just saw last week. I was giving a shir. So I have this book where they bring up all kinds of. It's a particular rabbi in Israel that wrote this book, and he brings out all kinds of interesting questions that he gets asked from all different walks of, all different parts of the Torah, all different parts of Jewish law. So last week there was just a question. I'm just bringing it now because it's relevant to this. So he says that the person says that I often meet someone. I'm walking in the street, and often I'm busy and I'm very sort of tied up. And this person kind of meets me, and it's a person that really annoys me. You know, we all have people we like, people we don't like so much, whatever the case is. And this person just annoys me. But I'm a nice person, so what I do is, I really want to, I sort of stop and I smile and I say, hello, how are you? And I kind of greet them nicely while thinking, like, would you just get out of here so I can keep moving? You know, right? But so he came, so after a while it was bothering him, so he came to ask an ethical question from the rabbi. He said, he knows that hypocrisy is very bad, and it says in the Talmud that one should never be achad belev, achad bepeh, which means you shouldn't be one way in your heart and one way in your mouth. So I don't know, like, am I doing the right thing? And maybe I should just tell him straight. Like, I don't particularly like you, stop bothering me and get out of here, right? Needless to say, after a bit of a discussion, the rabbi proved to him from Jewish, there's a chair here if you want. The rabbi proved to him from numerous different halachic and Jewish sources that it's perfectly okay to act nicely even though you're not feeling that way, particularly explain to him why it's not hypocrisy and so on and so forth. Okay, why am I bringing this in? Because action, we can choose action. We can decide that we have a certain value system by which we live. So we can decide to be nice to people, even though I'm like some people, I don't like others, even though I like this person one day, I don't like him the next day, whatever the case is, but I can choose to act in a certain way, even if it's inconsistent with the way I feel, right? Feelings are different. That's why feelings is the wood. It's the middle box. Feeling we're not so much in control of. And in fact, even when we have really good relationships, right? We don't love people the same every day, right? People often complain about this, that they enter into relationships with a lot of passion, with a lot of love, and that passion doesn't seem to be consistent, right? And they kind of have this erroneous assumption that the passion they had at the beginning of the relation is going to continue, and they think they're going to wake up every morning for the rest of their lives with the same passion. It's actually not going to happen. It doesn't happen in relationships between people, and it doesn't happen with our relationship with God either, right? There's a mitzvah in the Torah to love God. It's an emotion, to actually love Him. Do we love God the same every day? Absolutely not. Why? Because emotions go up and down. Emotions are very inconsistent. Emotions are very hard to change. They're very hard to control, as we said before. However, that's why God told us, because building the Mishkan was really a symbol of building the Mishkan within us, as a temple within our soul. And various parts of the Mishkan that was built in the desert served as a model for how we should behave and how we should process our behavior. So God says like this: if you want to be a place that is a place of growth and a place of spirituality and a place of divine presence, this is how you build the ark. You work from either side. You build two very strong boxes on either side. Build a very strong box of cognition and build a very strong box of action. And that will take care of the middle box. That will protect the middle box. The middle box is emotion, right? Don't work on your emotions. Work on your thinking and your action. And that's how you work on your emotions. So I'm bringing that in because the focus really of this discussion, of this series, more is about the one box, the box of thinking, the box of cognition. But it's important to mention that when we want to work on our emotions, the way to do it is to act, right? And people talk about this all the time. For example, sometimes if we wake up in a grumpy mood and we're not particularly grateful, we still express gratitude. That's part of action, expressing something. If we're feeling down and you go to a wedding and you're not particularly interested in the mitzvah of making the bride and groom happy, you're not in a happy mood altogether, you'd rather just go in a corner and sit and just wait out the night, Join the dance floor. Because if you join the dance floor, you become happy, right? The way we talk to people affects the way we relate to them. The way we talk to them and the way we hold back by not saying certain things will affect the way we feel. So it's brought, she brings it down in the context of modern psychology, but it's a very deep idea in Torah thought as well, in Jewish thinking, that the way we act actually creates a certain fitting. In fact, where it's derived from, this principle, is in the parasha of 2 weeks' time from now, which is interesting. I've mentioned this before. It's quoted by a great author called the Sefer HaChinuch, who goes through the different mitzvot of the Torah, and he talks about in 2 weeks' time there's a mitzvah of the priestly garments, of how the Kohanim, the priests in the temple, had to wear certain clothes, and they were very, very specifically designed when they would do the ritual service in the temple. And the commentators raised the question, what was the point of these beautiful clothing? And some of them were very heavy clothing, that each Kohen, each priest had to wear a very heavy sash that was very, very long when they were doing the avodah, when they were doing the service. And the commentaries asked, God needs the clothing? What was it all for? And they explained, no. It's got to do with the mindset and the mood of the particular Kohen, the priest that was doing the service at the time. Because when you put on certain clothing, as we know, clothing affects the mindset of a person. Right? We wear different clothes in different situations because actually it's not just always practical, it's the way it makes us feel different, right? So he says that's the point. And this is where we learn this idea from, that the heart follows the actions. Therefore God wanted that when the Kohanim, when the priests go into the temple, and when they're in the temple, they have to have a very strong focus and a very strong awareness and consciousness of the holiness of the place and the environment and of the experience. He said the way you do it is wear special clothes. When you wear special clothes, your feeling will be different, right? So that's this idea. Just like thoughts change emotion, actions change emotion. That's why sometimes also, if you're not feeling particularly kind, what we need to do is give and share and help others. When you help others and you give to others, even if you're not particularly in the mood, it helps also conjure up that feeling of kindness and compassion. Okay. Now, so let's go back to the thinking process. So one of the things that we developed at the end of last week's session was, you remember this was the ABC model, right? That we said what happens is that in every experience that we experience, there's an ABC. The A is the activating event, right? Which never changes, by the way, right? So the person who insults us, the car that cuts us off, the traffic jam that makes us late, all these things are events which we think have an effect on the way we feel, but they actually don't. And even when we change our emotions, the events will be the same, right? So we have the activating event, we have then the beliefs that we have, and then the consequences. The consequences is how we feel. So we've mentioned this analogy many times. So we get stuck in a traffic jam or someone cuts us off. That's the activating event. The consequence is we start to feel anxious, we're going to be late, we feel angry, why did the person do this? We curse the person or whatever the case is. That's the consequence, right? So people often think the consequence is an outcome of the activating event. It isn't. It's an outcome of the belief, right? In other words, I get stuck, someone cuts you off, I have a belief. The belief is no one should ever do that. People should watch where they're going. I should be able to control my day. I should always be punctual. It's a very, very bad thing to come late, ever. All these things, that's all beliefs. And those beliefs then activate the emotion. Because I believe I should never be late, I'm going to be late today, I get anxious, right? I told you once that I made a New Year's resolution to come late at least once a week. Because I was suffering from this condition. And I'm still suffering from it. It's getting better, but no, I try not to be late to Thursday morning, a different time. Okay. So the concept was that Albert Ellis introduced this concept of the D, right? So that's A, B, C, D, that we need to learn to dispute our beliefs. Now, and when we dispute our beliefs, we can't dispute the event. The event happened, and it's continuing to happen, and it is what it is. Just like we can't dispute the weather. We get up and, we definitely can't dispute the weather. I think we've learned that in the last 2 weeks, right? Doesn't matter, by the way, it doesn't matter how many times you look at your weather app on the phone, you know that. The weather stays the same for some reason. You look at it 5 minutes later in the hope that maybe a change? No, it doesn't. Or a different website. They have a different report. It's going to be the same, right? Okay. But we can dispute our belief system. That's what we could do. Okay. So, which leads us into really today's focus. So what I want to do today is share with you, we're going to expand on this whole concept. I want to share with you concepts which are in the second chapter of that book that I'm using a lot, which is chapter 2 in the book called Change Your Thinking by Sarah Edelman. The chapter is called Recognizing Faulty Thinking. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually take it a step deeper by using concepts from Jewish thinking and create, instead of 2 layers, 3 layers. What I mean by that is she talks about thoughts, but she says you have to go to the beliefs which behind the thoughts, right? So again, the thought is, I'm angry, stupid person, and so on and so forth. It's got to do with the belief that a person should always look what they're doing and people should always be fair, and so on. I'm going to take it a step further for you and share with you not just the beliefs that we have to dispute, but actually we have to challenge or recognize and deal with the cause of our beliefs. Okay? So what's behind the beliefs? Because why do we have beliefs? I mean, there might be many reasons, but what's behind, what's driving the belief system? In other words, beliefs live, as we've said many times, beliefs live in the brain, as do thoughts. It's the way we think, it's the way we process cognition, it's the way we make choices and decisions and process information. But there's forces beyond the head, there's forces beyond the intellect, or deeper than the intellect, that are driving our beliefs. And we need to have a look at that. We can't just say that we should dispute our beliefs, because we need to understand where our beliefs are coming from. So I'm sharing with you stuff from this chapter, but I'm going to take a little bit of just using Jewish literature to kind of go a bit deeper and to see actually what is behind our beliefs and the beliefs that she talks about, so that we can actually challenge them. So she begins the chapter with concepts to do with happiness. And I want to just read you, because it's very well written, this chapter, this paragraph, and let me just read it to you and then we're going to discuss it. So she writes the following. She says, if we brought together the happiest people in the world, what do you think they would have in common? Lots of money, good looks, career success, fame, and admiration from others? Wrong. We all know this. The happiest people are those, this is the key phrase, with the most flexible attitudes. Interesting. Of all people you consider to be genuinely happy, which there aren't that many of them, right? Are any of them rigid, demanding, and uncompromising? Do they get upset when things don't go their way? So the answer is no, right? Normally not, because they have a flexible attitude. So she goes on to say that a key characteristic of happy people is their ability to adapt to life circumstances, a trait called cognitive flexibility. It's a fancy term, but it means the same thing, right? Cognitive flexibility. This doesn't mean that they are weak or apathetic. In fact, they are often keen to work towards the things that they care about, but they are also willing to accept that some things are beyond their control. Much of the distress that we experience in our daily lives stems from rigid, inflexible thinking. Okay. Now, this is a concept which she begins with, and this is a concept which then she goes into a lot of detail in the rest of the chapter, right? So essentially what it means is that being in touch of our consciousness or our belief system really goes to the core of, number one, applying cognitive flexibility, right? That will help us dispute our belief system, because our beliefs are entrenched because we are cognitively inflexible, and therefore we need to develop flexibility. And also this concept that not everything is in our control. So that's the 2 things that she talks about. It needs to be, we need flexible thinking and we need to let go. Now, what's interesting, because she starts with the concept of happiness, so let me just talk about that a little bit. We know that in Judaism, one of the foundations of serving God and experiencing life in general is the concept we call simcha, which is happiness, right? What's interesting about happiness is this. Maimonides, the Rambam, when he talks about happiness, he says an interesting phrase. He says, simcha avodah gedolahi. Happiness takes a tremendous amount of effort. It is a work of toil. You have to work really hard to be happy. Not the kind of imagery everyone always thinks about when they think about happiness, right? Furthermore, we have a verse in Psalms, interesting, that connects happiness with humility. Now let's just read the verse, because it says, B'Hashem tithalel nafshi, which means my soul glories in God. Let the humble hear it and rejoice. Okay? So why is happiness so difficult? Number one, And what is the connection? What's the relationship between happiness and humility? Okay? So, later on, we're going to talk about lots of components of faulty thinking. But what we're going to discover, again, bringing in this sort of deeper layer, that faulty thinking has a number of components. In other words, negative thinking, negative beliefs, stem from a few core principles which are problematic. Okay? And they stem from being locked into a few core fundamental problems. What is it? First of all, inflexible thinking, as we said. Second of all, that inflexible thinking comes together a lot of times with self-centeredness, egocentricity, the need to always be right? Where does that inflexible thinking come from? It comes from arrogance. It comes from the need, I have to be right. It's my way. The way I look at it is correct. The way you look at it is wrong. Right? The third thing we need, and you mentioned this before, is control. Inflexible thinking often comes because we need to be in control. Human beings need to be in control. It's one of the ways we designed. It just depends how we use that control. But normally it's about us controlling everything else. Which often, by the way, is linked to another huge problem which creates inflexible thinking, funnily enough, is low self-esteem. A very, very weak concept of ourselves. Now, why do I say that? Something we've talked about many, many times. Is because when someone has a very weak perception of themselves, often what that leads to, sometimes it leads to just being a shmata. In other words, everything goes. Just walk all over me and whatever you say will be okay. But often it's not that way. Often the insecurity and the low self-esteem and the weak perception we have of ourselves actually leads to an obsession to protect ourselves, to protect that fragile self, and therefore to become incredibly inflexible. People who have flexible thinking have a very good self-perception of themselves. They're safe enough to say, well, there's another way. People who have inflexible thinking often stems from this concept of having a very low image of themselves, not understanding self-definition properly, and therefore that leads to being very, very inflexible. Which all of these core principles, inflexible thinking, being egocentric a lot of the time, needing, always being in control, having a low self-image, all of these things breed unhappiness. All right? That's what it is. People like that are always unhappy. Now, obviously, it goes in different levels, but generally speaking, this breeds a lot of unhappiness. Which, of course, all of these things are connected to one thing that I spoke about and I speak about many, many times, because it's such a fundamental concept and something so to be aware of and to work on. It's not something we fix, it's something we work on throughout our life, but it's connected to a very ungodly part of our makeup, which God designed us with, and that is the ego. The ego which lies beyond, deeper than our intellect. That part of us that is animalistic, that part of us which is self-centered, right? That ego, which is focused on self, leads to inflexible thinking, leads to arrogance or a low self-esteem, leads to the need to be in control, because it's all about me, right? Now, the bad news is we're all born with an ego. That's the way we were designed. The reason for that is because, as we mentioned many times, that God designed us to work on our ego, to discover something even deeper than the ego, to work on becoming more godly and more selfless rather than selfish. But we all, without exception, are born with an ego. Now, different people express it different ways. Different people are cleverer the way they express it than others. Different people have it worse than others, but we're all born with an ego. If you want to know the proof of that, just have a look at any child. Right? You ever found a humble child? You'd be worried if it was the child was humble, right? That's true. Children are very, very self-centered, and that's fine. It's actually quite cute some of the time, right? Until it stops being cute, of course. And they say, "Oops, I forgot to deal with that. I should have dealt with that before it became uncute." Right? But children are born unable to have relationships. You ever saw two toddlers talking to each other? I have some grandchildren that do this. It's very, very cute. I have a couple of grandchildren becoming very good friends, which means they just found someone else that looks more or less the same as them, same size, and they just keep talking, and they talk at the same time about different subjects. And it's wonderful. Why? Because children are designed, part of the design, that they should learn to discover themselves first, that the entire world centers around them. And the more you talk about sharing to very young children, it doesn't really help. I mean, it does. We should talk about sharing, and we plant seeds of good values. But normally at the very, very beginning, the way they understand your lectures on sharing is that the other person needs to share, and why didn't he give me his toy to play with? I'm just repeating stuff that I've been observing over the last few weeks. My grandkids don't know that like laboratory experiments. I'm busy observing human. I'm relearning human character because my kids have grown up already, so now I've got to relearn it. So I'm watching my grandkids. No, but seriously speaking, everyone's born with an ego, and with children you see it very, very strongly in different ways, less aggressive, more aggressive, but that's the way it is. The world centers around us, right? By the way, it's very consistent with Jewish thinking that the soul, which counters the ego, actually only really enters the person, the spiritual soul, the godly soul. What we call the nefesh elokit, the godly. I mean, all people are born with a soul, obviously, but the godly soul only really enters or is absorbed and internalized later on. So for the first formative years, they're actually not operating so much on the soul, they're operating more on the animal soul, which explains why kids are so self-centered, right? But we all have an ego, and our life mission is to move beyond that ego. How do we counter the ego? How do we challenge the ego, which the ego, by the way, is the cause for the faulty thinking. It's the cause for my inflexible cognition. It's the cause for my need to control everything. It's the cause for my low self-esteem because I'm all into myself, protecting myself all the time. It all stems from the ego. How do we do that? So from a Jewish perspective, it actually becomes a lot easier. Because actually it's a hard thing to counter ego. Because the fact that I look at something the way I do, the fact that I'm into myself, why shouldn't I be into myself? There are certain principles that make it a lot easier. It doesn't make it easy, because it's never easy, but it makes it easier, at least on a cognitive level, to counter the ego if we incorporate a few fundamental principles. These 4 principles. The 4 principles is, number 1, belief in God. Without belief in God, I'm sharing with you this process from Jewish literature, obviously, and it makes sense because the belief in a belief in God and the infinity of God. In other words, that God we are finite and God is infinite. Now, why is that so important? It's important for many reasons, but in this context, because it goes to the second point. And the second point is that we possess, besides the ego, we also possess a godly soul. Meaning a soul which is at the root of our existence, the essence of our being, the core of our identity, and that soul has an infusion of godliness. It's a spark of godliness. It's a godly soul. What does that mean? Because it's a godly soul, it means that we can be godly, which means we can go beyond ourselves. We can learn to be flexible. We can be infinite. Now, not infinite as God is, but infinite in the human sense, meaning we don't have to be rigid. We don't have to be locked into who we are. We actually can move beyond who we are. We can look at someone else. We can have a proper relationship. We can go beyond our comfort zone. We can grow as people. We can change. All of those things come from not being self-centered, not being locked into ourselves. They come from the belief that there's a God, and the God gave us a soul, and that soul has a spark of infinity. Thirdly, strong, and this is a very, very strong, important, critical component of this whole process, the belief that we're not just here to party. Right? We're here for to party. We're here for a purpose. Right? We have a mission. The mission is to grow. The mission is to make ourselves and the environment around us a better place. And the fourth thing, and this is sometimes the hardest one because it goes to the heart of control, is it's not hard to say it, but it's hard to live it. The fourth thing is the concept of Hashgacha Pratit. What does that mean? That everything happens for a reason. Everything happens, by the way, in other words, first of all, everything happens by divine providence, but not just divine providence. It's one thing to say everything happens, well, God made it happen. Okay, or God let it happen, whatever the case is. But it's deeper than that. The true meaning of Hashgacha Pratit means, divine providence means, that everything that happens, is part of the overall plan, going back to the concept of mission and purpose. You following me? In other words, if something happens that is out of my control, right? Because what is in our control, as we've mentioned many times, as the Talmud says, everything's in the hands of heaven except for fear of heaven, which means that we do control our emotional responses, we control our moral decisions, but we don't control the traffic, and we don't control the weather, we don't control what people say to us, and we don't control anything else that happens. So, but that's very frustrating because we want to control. But when we include that fourth component to understand that Hashgacha Pratit means that everything that happens is divinely orchestrated, not only is divinely orchestrated, but it is directly related to the mission and the purpose that I have to fulfill today. My mission on earth today has to do with what is happening. That's a very hard thing to live with, but it's the most liberating thing to live with. Imagine if we really lived with it, right? And then you got into your car and you got completely stuck, or someone cut you off, or the weather was bad, or the more, to use a more contemporary example, there's a leak in the roof, right? Which is very annoying and very frustrating and hard to live with. But if we really believe that what happened was meant to happen, and it's got to do with our mission and purpose, so I thought when I woke up on Monday morning and my purpose and mission was to do what's in my diary, which was the correct thing to do, and planning responsibly is a responsible thing to do. But it obviously wasn't. My mission in life was to wait home and wait for the plumber, who said they're coming at 9 o'clock and showed up at 3:30 in the afternoon, right? So, and my mission was not to get upset. And my mission was to find something useful to do. To maybe call someone while I'm waiting that I haven't called for a long time to find out how they are. Or whatever, I'm just giving an example, right? And not to come out at the end of the day and just to krech, as they say in Yiddish, to just complain and be grumpy. What a waste of a day. See, in Jewish thinking, there's no such thing as a waste of a day, unless you waste it. But it's your choice to waste or not to waste it, because every day has a mission. Every day has a purpose. And that purpose and mission is not always what you think it's going to be. How do I know what my mission is? Follow Hashgacha Pratit. See what happens that day. And then respond. Respond with purpose. Respond with mission. Respond with meaning. Right? But that's only possible if I believe that there's a higher being. If I believe that I can be flexible. If I believe I have a mission and a purpose. I believe that I have a soul which has a godly infusion that allows me to do that. You follow? Now, that's why I said in a few minutes ago that when we talk about challenging our beliefs, we have to challenge what's behind our beliefs. You follow? In other words, when I go into the car, use the example that she gave last week, and someone cut me off in traffic, and I get very, very agitated and stressed and anxious, and I say something not nice about the person. So she said that was based on the belief. The belief was that people always have to do the right thing, and that I always have to be able to drive in the street and be able to not be cut off, right? To be able to drive smoothly. That's my belief, so I've got to challenge my belief. The way she put it was to challenge our belief, that she says, it's nice to be able to drive smoothly, it would be wonderful if I could get to the thing on time, but it doesn't always happen, right? So that's challenging the belief. What I'm suggesting is that we need to go deeper than that. And if we're able to go deeper than that, it's more difficult, but it becomes easier. Otherwise, it's more liberating. Challenging our belief is not, well, it doesn't always happen, that's the way the world works. Challenging our belief means going deeper, that no, I'm not in control, someone else is in control, I'm born here for a mission, a purpose, and I have a soul, and I have to fight my ego. It's not all about me, it's about purpose. It's about what I have to accomplish in the world. There's a story of the first Chabad Rebbe, that one time a person came to him. One of his followers came to him and was seeking advice, seeking blessing. And the person came into what they call Yechidut, which is a private audience with the Rebbe, and unloaded, which is fine, that's part of what you do sometimes. He unloaded, and he said in Yiddish, he said, Rebbe, ich darf parnasse, I need a living, and ich darf gesund, and I need gesund, and ich darf. Everything started with ich darf, I need this, and I need that, and I need this, which are all legitimate things, by the way, which eventually the Rebbe would have probably given him some advice and given him a bracha to do. But I think the Rebbe sensed that he'd lost the plot a little bit. So he said to him, I'll say it in Yiddish because it's very beautiful in Yiddish, and I'll try to translate afterwards. He said, so the Alter Rebbe looked at him very, very strongly and said to him, Du sagst alles, was du darfst, but du sagst nicht, zu was darf man dir. Which means you keep on saying what you need, but you forgot to focus on what you are needed for. That's the point. Right? And if it's not about us all the time, it's about what we are needed for, it's about what our mission is, Now, of course, we live with us. We live with our personality, with our emotional setup, with our talents and skill set and so on and so forth. And we're supposed to use them. That's a God gift that we're supposed to. However, when things are out of our control and we go to the very depth and core of what we really believe in, if we can come to that awareness of these fundamental principles, then our beliefs will be completely different. And when our beliefs will be different, our emotions will be different. Does it work every day, all the time? Absolutely not. But at least we can start somewhere. We can start with going to the very core. So let's because what happens is that what fights all of these principles is the ego. The ego doesn't come to terms with this. So as I've said many times, we have these two forces within ourselves fighting with each other, right? Because the ego has a focus on self. The ego has a focus on protection of self. The ego doesn't do what's good for the purpose. The ego does what's good for us now. And there is no purpose. There's only pleasure. In other words, the ego is about how can I feel good now? Nothing to do with the long-term plan, nothing to do with the long-term mission, nothing to do with anything higher than me. There's no surrender. Ego is about me. And we all have an ego, which is why we don't always succeed with this. But we also have a soul, as we said many times. And the soul is stronger than the ego. And if we can dig deep and connect with who we really are, then we can start absorbing these types of beliefs, and then we can use that to change our whole belief system. Which is why that all has to do with the concept of humility. Because that brings true happiness. When we have flexible thinking, as she says, and we're able to let go of control, we are happy, but that happiness comes from a belief system. And that belief system is fighting the ego, and when you fight the ego, you achieve true humility. What is true humility? True humility means that it's not all about me, because I'm part of a greater existence. Which is why, by the way, as we said many times, when you have true humility, it's not about negating oneself, it's about understanding that I'm not myself for myself, but I'm part of something much greater. I'm part of the infinite existence of God, and therefore I don't need to protect myself all day. On the contrary, I'm stronger than I thought I was, right? But so is everyone else, and there's plenty of room for everyone else. Humility brings selflessness rather than selfishness. Humility brings that sense of not being trapped in myself and therefore not being inflexible, but being able to have flexible thinking. Humility brings the concept of letting go. It's not all about me and I don't control everything. I can let go because I believe in a higher purpose and I believe in a mission that when things are presented to me, I need to use them out for purpose and for the mission. Which is why King David says that happiness is linked with humility. Yeah.
When we look at the events around the world now, which isn't so good, is it all supposed to say to ourselves, this is how it's supposed to be?
So, that's a very, very good question and probably beyond the scope of this discussion, but maybe just briefly to say this. I'm always caution people, when we look at events around the world, I'm certainly not on the level, and I don't think most people are, to interpret the events, but it's definitely not by chance, right? Maybe the message of the craziness that goes around the world is to just counter it with more good, counter it with more light, counter it by, maybe it's a reminder and to raise the consciousness and raise awareness of speaking to people with respect when we see that, what happens when people don't do that. Being more proud in our Jewishness and in our value system when we see that everything is going the other way around, right? So there's a lot of messages there. Not always we learn from things how things should be. Sometimes we learn from things how things shouldn't be. And that's maybe a reminder. So should we just ignore it? No, we should never ignore anything. We always have to respond to everything that's happening. And maybe we should think of a broader discussion on that. But yeah, everything happens for a reason. But what you do with it is... So let's just go back a little bit now and just see how this plays out a bit. Okay? So going back to the chapter in the book, she talks about something that Albert Ellis called irrational beliefs, right? And he said that most people, this is very interesting, I'm going to read you these 3 lines. He said, Albert Ellis observed that most people by their very nature are inclined to think in ways that are irrational and self-defeating. He noted that some people are particularly predisposed towards upsetting emotions because they habitually think in self-defeating ways. According to Ellis, our thinking is irrational if it goes against our basic desire for happiness and long life, right? So, what does that mean? So why do people keep doing this? Why do people keep repeating the same mistakes? Why do people keep being selfish and ultimately being self-destructive, landing up with so much unhappiness? And there is so much unhappiness in the world, right? because the reason is because we wired that way. We wired with an ego, and unless we consciously fight it and consciously reveal who we really are, and consciously strive to be more humble and to be more inflexible and to let go of control and to believe in something higher, it's not going to happen. We will continue to be self-centered. So let's just go through, she goes through a long list. I'm just going to quote a few. She talks about, okay, so that's what we're talking about, right? So she goes around, she has a table here. On the one side it says common irrational beliefs, and then the consequences. So for example, a common irrational belief is, by the way, conscious or unconscious, we're not always conscious of our beliefs, is I must be loved and approved by everyone. Right? That's a conscious belief. Many people have it, not always express it, but what's the consequence of that? Anxiety, unassertive behavior, poor self-esteem, and so on. But now let's take it, what's behind that belief? Behind that belief is that weak perception of self, which comes from a lack of understanding of who we really are. Another common rational belief is I must be competent, adequate, and achieving in every respect. Right? People are driven, they must achieve. Where does that come from? So what's the consequence of that again? Self-doubting, frustration, shame, procrastination sometimes. Because if I must do everything well, then I'm scared to do something because I might not do it well, right? But what's behind, what's deeper than that common rational belief? It's that ego. Why do I think I must always? You know what I'm saying? So that's what I'm trying to bring out. That we have beliefs, and that's her point. Beliefs bring the consequences. It's the belief system we have to dispute, but we have to go deeper than that. We have to understand where those beliefs coming from. It's awful when things don't go the way I would like them to do. Right? What's behind that belief? That sense of control. The consequence of that belief is frustration, depression, and despair. And so on. Anger and all that. Another common irrational belief is human unhappiness is caused by life circumstances, and it's impossible to be happy when things aren't going well for me. Right? That's a common belief. What does that bring to? Helplessness, despair, failure to take responsibility, and so on. But what's behind that belief? That lack of faith, that everything happens for a purpose, that the things are not going to change. What can change is my response. What can change is my choice to make it work and to make it meaningful and purposeful. So I guess that was the real point that I wanted to sort of try to bring out today, that in the ABCD model, when we're disputing, it's not just enough to dispute the beliefs. We have to go deeper and see what is bringing those beliefs and work on those foundational principles. Those things I said before, the foundational principles which actually create the belief and drive the belief. So the belief brings the consequences, the belief brings the negative emotions, it brings the negative thinking. But what's behind the belief is inspiring the belief system. It's been inspiring the thought process. And it's really good, particularly from a Jewish perspective, to go very, very deeply into what is bringing the beliefs. What's our belief system? Are we conscious of the soul? Are we conscious that everything has a purpose and meaning? Are we conscious that we have the ability to achieve meaning and purpose, to meet our mission every single day of our life, no matter what happens? Even if I thought my mission was to do a particular thing, if it doesn't work out, so my mission is something else. It might just be to be nice to other people today. It might be to be calm. It might be to help someone else that needed help, because now I have time, I can do it.
Does our mission change daily? Because it sounds like...
No, there's a general, yes. So I should have made that clear. So it's the implementation of the mission that changes every day. So we have values that direct our overall mission, right? In the Jewish context, our mission is to serve God. Our mission is to work on our character. Our mission is to be a better person. Our mission is to be kind, to enhance our relationships. Our mission is to be humble. Our mission is to do mitzvot, whatever the case is, right? But that's what each person's mission is. How each person expresses that mission is different, and in each person's life is different every day, right? So I might have thought, for example, just to go back to the example I was saying, I might think when I wake up in the morning that my mission today was to responsibly organize an event. The event is consistent with my values. Being responsible is a value. Being responsible is part of my mission. So my responsible planning of the day was in accordance with my mission. And then I ended up waiting for the plumber for 6 hours. So obviously my mission, same mission, but my mission had to be executed that day differently. My mission today was to control myself. My mission today was maybe to smile at someone in the street because I was waiting at home. My mission maybe was to study something, even though because I can't be in the office organizing it, whatever. But I need to understand that my mission today obviously was different. And now I have to see, within the context of the circumstances today, what can I do to achieve my overall mission in the context of today's circumstances, right? So just to finish off, and there's a lot more I was going to get down to, but we'll do it next week. So therefore, really, what we need to train ourselves to do is this. And this is something she brings up in this chapter, which is very, very important. What she calls monitor your thinking. So the first step of all of this is actually to be aware of what we're thinking. Right? Especially in today's fast-moving world, we go around a whole day, we're actually not even aware of what we're thinking. And often when we express negative emotion, sometimes it's obvious to us what the linkage is, sometimes it's not. Especially if you want to take it a bit deeper. Right? Sometimes, by the way, it's even good to actually sit down and just write it out. Because when you express it to yourself properly, in other words, what was the circumstance? How did I respond? Why did I respond? What was my beliefs that made me respond that way? And then challenge yourself to take it a step further. What was behind those beliefs? Why did I believe it had to happen that way? Is it because of control? Is it because I'm getting weak in this concept of mission and purpose? So before we can learn how to change our thinking, we actually have to be aware that we are thinking and that we do have beliefs, and the beliefs are driven by certain basic values and basic perceptions. We have to be aware of the ego, the selfishness in us versus the selflessness in others, the animal in us versus the soul in us. It's important to be aware of that. Because sometimes it's important to know where something is coming from. Sometimes we're not able to change all our emotions. Sometimes we just need to know, okay, I did respond that way. I am feeling a bit jealous. I am feeling a bit threatened. But at least I know where it's coming from. It's not who I really am. I know there's part of me that's fighting it, and it's coming from that ego part of me. So slowly, I got to try to chip away. I might not be able to do it all in one day, but I can chip it at least. But step one is at least to monitor our thinking, to actually be aware that's happening. So the monitor the thinking is really step one, to start reflecting, not over-reflecting, because that's not a good thing to do either. But when things do happen and we had a rough time or we responded really badly, we're not feeling good about it, just take 5 minutes and say, how did I respond? What were my belief system that was driving the response, and what's behind the belief system? Once we do that, then we can start on the process of developing strategies to actually change the thinking, which will continue over the next couple of weeks. Have a wonderful week.